My life was a collection of quiet routines. The precise drip of the coffee maker at 7 in the morning, the soft glow of my dual monitors in the dim light of my home office, the predictable weight of my cat sleeping on my feet. I was a graphic designer who worked from home, a specialist in clean lines and muted color palettes, and my life had started to mimic my work, orderly, contained, and devoid of any startling color. For years, the only splash of vibrant, chaotic hue in my internal world was Caleb, my best friend Mark's older brother, a man I hadn't seen in person since college, but whose memory was a permanent, smoldering ember in the back of my mind. The phone call from Mark shattered the grayscale tranquility. "Leo, man, I'm so sorry. I can't make the cabin trip. Work is just insane." I murmured the appropriate sympathies, my own disappointment a dull, familiar ache. The annual trip to the woods was my one scheduled deviation from routine. "But," he continued, his voice taking on a wheedling tone I knew all too well, "Caleb's still going. He's got the whole week off. You should still go. Keep him company. Please. He'll be so bored otherwise." The air left my lungs. Caleb. It had been 6 years. 6 years of me curating a careful distance, of politely declining invitations to family dinners I knew he'd be attending. 6 years of nurturing a crush that should have died from neglect, but instead had festered into something chronic and unshakable. The thought of being alone with him for a week in a remote cabin sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated terror through me. "I don't know, Mark. Come on, Leo. For me. It's all paid for. Just pack a bag. He'll pick you up Friday." And because I was a creature of quiet compliance, and because a treacherous, self-destructive part of me yearned for it, I heard myself agree. The decision felt less like a choice and more like a surrender to an inevitable, terrifying gravity. Friday arrived like a verdict. I was in my bedroom, staring into an open duffel bag, my hands full of neatly folded t-shirts. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. What was I doing? This was a mistake. A colossal, Category 5 mistake. The doorbell rang, a sharp, intrusive sound that made me jump. Through the peephole, a distorted figure stood on my porch. Broad shoulders, dark hair. "Caleb." I opened the door, my hand slick on the knob. The boy I remembered from college, all lanky limbs and a charmingly crooked smile, was gone. In his place stood a man. He'd filled out in all the right ways, his frame solid and sure under a simple gray Henley. The mischievous grin was still there, but it was deeper now, etched with fine lines at the corners of his eyes. Those eyes, a startlingly clear shade of blue, met mine with an unnerving directness. "Leo," he said, and his voice was a revelation. The higher tenor I recalled had dropped into a low, gravelly hum that seemed to vibrate in the air between us. "Ready to brave the wilderness." A scent drifted from him, something clean and woodsy, like cedar and rain-soaked earth. It was his cologne, I presumed, but it smelled like an extension of him, something elemental and real. All I could do was nod, my own voice having apparently abandoned me. He was the catalyst, the sudden, brilliant splash of crimson on my muted canvas, and I was already completely overwhelmed. The drive north was a study in quiet tension. I sat in the passenger seat of his truck, a vehicle that felt as large and steady as he was, and I engaged in my favorite pastime, observation. I watched the way his large, capable hands rested on the steering wheel, fingers tapping out a silent rhythm against the worn leather. I watched the muscles in his forearm flex when he shifted gears. I watched the landscape blur past, but my focus was entirely internal, fixed on the man beside me. He was an easy conversationalist, asking about my work, about Mark, about things that required simple, factual answers. I was grateful. It allowed me to exist in the space without having to reveal the frantic monologues spooling through my head. Every time he glanced at me, I felt it like a physical touch. His gaze was steady, unreadable, and it lingered for just a fraction of a second too long, sending a confusing flutter of panic and hope through my chest. "He's just being friendly," my rational mind insisted. "He's Mark's brother. This is normal." But my body, that traitorous vessel of want, disagreed. It catalogued every micro-event with breathless attention. At a roadside diner where we stopped for coffee, he passed me a mug, and his fingers brushed against mine. The contact was fleeting, accidental, but a jolt of heat shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned, my face flushing. He didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he gave no sign, just turned his attention to paying the cashier. Later, as we were leaving, a family with a stroller crowded the doorway. Caleb, moving behind me, placed a hand on the small of my back to guide me through. It wasn't a shove or a tap. His palm was warm and firm, resting there for 3 solid seconds. 1, 2, 3. I could feel the distinct pressure of each of his fingers through the thin fabric of my shirt. The gesture was casually protective, something a person does 100 times without thinking. But for me, in that moment, it felt like a brand. My entire nervous system lit up, every nerve ending screaming his name. I stumbled out into the cool afternoon air, my breathing shallow. He dropped his hand as soon as we were clear, his expression as placid as ever. I was a mess of internal analysis. Was I imagining it? Was I projecting my own desperate yearning onto these insignificant moments? Or was he testing the waters, sending out subtle signals to see how I would react? The ambiguity was a special kind of torture, a tightrope walk between hope and humiliation. I spent the rest of the drive staring out the window, acutely aware of the 6 inches of space between his thigh and mine, a gulf that felt both infinitesimally small and impossibly wide. The cabin was exactly as I remembered it, rustic, smelling of pine and dust and old wood smoke. It was nestled deep in a stand of birch trees, the silence broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. The simplicity of it should have been calming, but with Caleb there, every object seemed charged with potential intimacy. The worn sofa in front of the stone fireplace, the small kitchen with its scarred wooden countertops, the 2 doors leading off the main room, one to the single bathroom, the other to the single bedroom. "All right, first things first," Caleb announced, dropping his bags by the door. "Generator, then firewood." What followed was an hour of surprisingly easy teamwork. The generator, a stubborn old beast, refused to start. I knew my way around engines less than I knew my way around ancient Sumerian pottery, but Caleb was patient. He talked me through it, his voice calm as he pointed out the fuel line, the choke, the spark plug. I found myself kneeling beside him, our shoulders brushing, my focus entirely on the task, but my awareness entirely on his proximity. The scent of him, that cedar and rain scent, was now mingled with the faint, metallic smell of gasoline. He finally gave the cord a sharp, decisive pull, and the generator sputtered to life with a roar. He grinned, a flash of white teeth in the growing dusk, and nudged my shoulder with his. "See? Teamwork." The simple, celebratory contact sent another wave of warmth through me. We worked in a comfortable rhythm after that, hauling logs from the woodpile and stacking them on the porch. The physical labor was a welcome distraction, giving my anxious energy an outlet. We didn't talk much, but the silence was different now. It wasn't the tense, analytical silence of the car ride. It was a companionable quiet, the shared quiet of 2 people working toward a common goal. Later, with a fire crackling in the hearth and the generator humming a low tune outside, we sat on the worn sofa, mugs of tea warming our hands. The firelight cast flickering shadows across Caleb's face, making the angles of his jaw and cheekbones seem sharper, more defined. The playful instigator I'd seen all day seemed to recede, replaced by someone quieter, more contemplative. He was staring into the flames, his brow furrowed slightly. I watched him, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over me. This was nice. Unexpectedly nice. The terror I'd felt just that morning seemed distant, almost foolish. "Are you happy, Leo?" The question, spoken into the quiet room, was so direct, so out of the blue, that it startled me. I looked at him. He had turned his head and was watching me, his blue eyes stripped of their earlier mischief. They were just open, searching. What? I stammered. "Happy," he repeated, his voice soft. "With your work, your life." Like really happy. It was a question no one ever asked me. People asked if I was busy, if my work was going well. No one asked if I was happy. The question was a key turning in a lock I had forgotten existed. It was a moment of unexpected softness from a man I had mentally typecast as all confident swagger. It was an admission of a deeper, more introspective current running beneath his surface. "I'm content," I finally managed, the word tasting like a lie. Contentment was the muted gray I lived in. It wasn't happiness. Caleb held my gaze, and I had the distinct feeling that he could see right through my carefully constructed facade. He saw the loneliness, the quiet yearning. He didn't press, just gave a small, slow nod, as if my non-answer was answer enough. He turned back to the fire, and a new kind of silence fell between us. It was a fragile, vulnerable quiet, a space where something unspoken had been acknowledged. The barriers I had so carefully maintained around myself were beginning to crumble, eroded by the simple, unexpected force of him asking a real question. And I was terrified of what would be left exposed when they finally fell. After a long, comfortable stretch of silence by the fire, the inevitable moment arrived. My body was humming with a pleasant exhaustion from the day's labor, and a yawn cracked my jaw. I should probably figure out the couch, I said, gesturing toward the lumpy-looking sofa bed in the corner of the main room. It was the only other sleeping option besides the single bedroom. This was the plan I had formulated in my head, the safe, sensible path. I stood up and went to inspect it, pulling at a cushion. Caleb didn't move from the sofa, but I felt his eyes on me. I could feel his gaze on my back as I fumbled with the hidden mechanism, trying to figure out how to unfold the metal beast within. "Don't bother with that thing." His voice came from behind me, still low and calm, but with an edge I couldn't quite decipher. I turned. He was watching me, his expression unreadable in the flickering firelight. "What do you mean? I'm not kicking you out of the bed." He let out a short, soft laugh. It wasn't a mocking sound. It was something else. "I'm not asking you to," he said. He finally stood up, stretching his arms over his head, the movement pulling his Henley taut across his chest. He took a step toward me. "That couch is a nightmare. I slept on it once. You'll feel like you've been in a car wreck. The bed's a king." He paused, his eyes locking onto mine. The air grew thick, heavy. This was it. The tipping point. The moment where the subtext that had been humming beneath every interaction all day was about to break the surface. "One bed's enough," he said. The words hung there, simple, declarative, and utterly loaded. My blood went cold, then hot. My mind raced, trying to find the casual, nonchalant response that this moment demanded. "Oh, sure, man, no problem." But the words wouldn't form. My throat was tight, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't a suggestion. It felt like a challenge. A dare. He saw the panic in my eyes. I knew he did. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. It wasn't mean. It was knowing. He was pushing, deliberately and gently, to see if I would push back. "Unless you're scared," he added, his voice dropping to a near whisper. He was teasing, but the undercurrent was serious. He was giving me an out, but it was an out that would require me to confirm his suspicion that I was scared of him, of the proximity, of what it meant. And my pride, that stupid, stubborn thing, wouldn't let me. I couldn't admit it. I couldn't let him see the sheer, overwhelming panic and desire that were warring inside me. So I did the only thing I could. I lifted my chin, met his challenging gaze, and lied. "Not scared," I said, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. "Just didn't want to crowd you." The small smile on his lips widened just a fraction. "It's a big bed, Leo," he said softly. "I think we'll manage." He turned then and headed for the bathroom, leaving me standing in the middle of the room, my entire body thrumming with adrenaline. The interaction had lasted less than a minute, but it had fundamentally altered the landscape. The pretense was gone. We both knew what was happening, even if neither of us had said it aloud. He had laid a card on the table, and I had chosen not to fold. Now, I had to see the hand through. An hour later, the cabin was dark and silent save for the crackle of the dying fire and the steady hum of the generator. I was in the king-sized bed, lying rigidly on the far left side, my body as stiff as a board. I'd changed into a t-shirt and pajama pants in the bathroom, my movements clumsy and rushed. Caleb was already in bed when I emerged, a dark shape under the covers on the opposite side. I could feel the heat of his body across the vast expanse of mattress between us. I could hear the soft sound of his breathing, a slow, steady rhythm that was the only anchor in the roaring silence of my own mind. I was hyper-aware of everything. The weight of the quilt, the scent of clean laundry mixed with his cedar and rain smell on the pillow, the sheer, overwhelming fact of his presence. We lay with our backs to each other, a silent, unacknowledged truce. But there was no truce in my head. My thoughts were a chaotic stampede. What am I doing? What is he thinking? Did I misread everything? Is he just a ridiculously accommodating straight guy? Or is this what I think it is? The not knowing was excruciating. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to sleep, to escape the relentless noise in my head. I don't know how long we lay there. It could have been minutes or an hour. Time had dissolved into a thick soup of tension and darkness. You're thinking so loud I can hear it. Caleb's voice, a low rumble in the dark, shattered the silence. It wasn't accusatory. It was a simple statement of fact. My breath hitched. I didn't move. I didn't know what to do. Slowly, I heard the rustle of sheets as he shifted. I felt the mattress dip slightly as he turned to face my back. My own back was a wall of tension, every muscle coiled tight. I waited, my heart pounding a frantic, desperate beat. And then, I felt it. The gentle, hesitant touch of his fingers against my shoulder. The contact was electric, 1,000 times more potent than the brush of our hands in the diner or the pressure on my back in the doorway. This was deliberate. This was a question. My body made the decision before my mind could veto it. I turned over. Slowly. The space between us was now filled with shadow and unspoken things. His face was a pale oval in the gloom, his eyes dark pools. He was already watching me. He had been waiting. His hand, which had been on my shoulder, slid down my arm, finding my hand in the space between us. His fingers were warm and strong as they laced through mine. The simple, profound intimacy of it stole my breath. I haven't been pretending, Leo, he whispered, his voice thick with a vulnerability I'd only glimpsed by the fire. Not this whole weekend. Not for a long time before that. The confession landed in the quiet space between us, and in its wake, years of my own secret, silent yearning came rushing to the surface. The breaking point had arrived. The dam of my carefully constructed composure finally burst. I didn't have the words to answer him. All I had was this overwhelming feeling, this tidal wave of relief and terror and hope. He must have seen it in my eyes. He lifted his other hand, his thumb brushing softly against my cheek. The touch was feather-light, questioning. I leaned into it, a silent surrender. And then he was leaning in, closing the final few inches between us. His lips met mine. It wasn't a rushed, hungry kiss. It was slow, tentative. It was a question asked in a language our bodies understood better than our words. It tasted of tea and wood smoke and honesty. I felt the tension drain out of me in a single, shuddering exhale, my hand tightening around his. The kiss deepened, my response giving him the answer he sought. It was right. It was so terrifyingly, beautifully right. It wasn't a performance, not for show, not a mistake. It was the consummation of a feeling that had lived in the shadows for years, finally brought into the soft, dim light. When we finally broke apart, he didn't move away. He rested his forehead against mine, our breath mingling in the cool air. His hand was still laced with mine, a solid, warm anchor in the darkness. We didn't need to say anything else. In the quiet of the cabin, surrounded by the deep woods, the truth had finally been spoken, not in words, but in a touch, in a kiss, in the simple, profound act of two people finally turning to face each other in the dark. I woke to the pale gray light of dawn filtering through the thin curtains. For a disorienting moment, I didn't know where I was. Then the scent of pine and old wood registered, and the memory of the night before came rushing back in a dizzying, heart-stopping wave. Caleb, the kiss, his hand in mine. I turned my head. The space beside me in the bed was empty. The sheets were cool. A cold, familiar dread washed over me. Panic, sharp and icy, clawed at my throat. He was gone. He'd woken up, realized what he'd done, and fled. The morning after regret. I had read about it, seen it in movies. I had architected entire scenarios of it in my own anxious mind for years. And now it was happening. The beautiful, fragile thing that had existed in the darkness had shattered in the light of day. I lay there for a long moment, paralyzed by the weight of my own catastrophic thinking. My body felt heavy, my limbs filled with lead. The joy and relief of the previous night curdled into a bitter cocktail of humiliation and shame. Of course he regretted it. I was his best friend's quiet, awkward friend. He was Caleb. Then I heard it. A soft clink of ceramic from the main room. A cupboard door opening and closing. He wasn't gone. He was just in the kitchen. The relief was so profound it almost made me dizzy, but it was immediately replaced by a new kind of anxiety. The awkwardness. The conversation we would have to have. What do you say to the man you've been secretly in love with for years, the morning after you finally kiss him? I forced myself out of bed, my movements stiff. I pulled on my jeans from the day before, my fingers fumbling with the button. I walked to the bedroom door and paused, my hand hovering over the knob, my heart resuming its frantic rhythm. I took a deep breath and stepped out. He was standing at the counter, his back to me, wearing a pair of sweatpants and the same Henley from yesterday. He was pouring hot water into 2 mugs. The scene was so domestic, so normal, it felt surreal. He didn't seem to have heard me. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions. I felt a desperate urge to retreat back into the bedroom, to hide until this moment passed. But then he turned, as if sensing my presence. He held one of the mugs in his hands, his expression unreadable. For a heart-stopping second, we just looked at each other. I searched his face for any sign of regret, of distance, of polite dismissal. His expression softened. The guarded look vanished, replaced by a quiet warmth that reached his eyes. "Morning," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. He walked over and held the mug out to me. I took it, our fingers brushing. This time, I didn't flinch. "I didn't run away," he said softly, as if reading my mind. "Just needed coffee. Figured you might, too." He looked at me, really looked at me, his gaze steady and clear. There was no teasing glint, no challenge. Just a deep, unnerving sincerity. "I'm glad last night happened, Leo." The reassurance was a physical wave washing over me, so powerful it almost buckled my knees. The tight knot of anxiety in my chest loosened its grip. "Me too," I whispered, the words barely audible. A small, genuine smile touched his lips. He reached out, not to kiss me, but to gently touch my arm, his fingers resting on my bicep for a moment. It was a simple, grounding gesture. A confirmation. "Good," he said. We spent the day navigating the new, fragile landscape between us. We went for a long hike, the air crisp and smelling of damp earth. The conversation was a little clumsy at first, a dance of avoidance around the monumental thing that had shifted. But as we walked, the rhythm of our footsteps falling into sync, the awkwardness began to melt away. We talked about books, about movies, about dreams for the future that we'd never shared with anyone else. The internal test for me was monumental. Every time he smiled at me, every time our hands brushed as we navigated a narrow part of the trail, a part of my brain screamed that it was temporary, a fluke, a cabin weekend phenomenon that would evaporate the moment we hit the highway back to civilization. I had to consciously fight the urge to pull away, to retreat into my shell of self-preservation. I had to force myself to trust the quiet reassurance in his eyes, to believe that the man walking beside me was the same one who had held my hand in the dark and told me he wasn't pretending. It was a constant, exhausting battle against years of ingrained self-doubt. The drive home was imbued with a quiet, melancholic tension. Every mile that brought us closer to the city felt like a step away from the bubble of intimacy we had created in the woods. I stared out the passenger window, a familiar dread coiling in my stomach. This was it, the end of the fantasy. We would get back, and he would drop me off, and we would go back to being Mark's brother and Mark's friend, burdened with the memory of a kiss in a cabin. Caleb was quiet, his focus on the road, his jaw set. I interpreted his silence as him building his own walls back up, preparing for the return to normal life. The thought was a lead weight in my gut. I had finally tasted color, and now I was being returned to my world of grayscale. We were about half an hour from my apartment when he finally spoke. "You're thinking loud again," he said, his voice soft. He glanced at me, his brow creased with concern. I just shook my head, unable to articulate the spiral of fear and disappointment I was trapped in. He sighed, a quiet, frustrated sound. He pulled the truck over onto the shoulder of the highway, the suddenness of the action making me jump. He put the truck in park and turned in his seat to face me fully. "Leo, look at me." I reluctantly tore my gaze from the window and met his. His eyes were intense, serious. "This isn't just for the weekend," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "Not for me. Is that what you're thinking?" I could only nod, feeling a hot blush of embarrassment creep up my neck. He reached across the center console and took my hands in his. His grip was warm and solid. I meant what I said. I haven't been pretending. For a long time, I've wondered about you. About this. I was just waiting for the right time. Or maybe I was just being a coward. He gave a small, self-deprecating smile. This weekend, this was me finally stopping being a coward. He squeezed my hands. So no, this is not ending when I drop you off at your door. In fact, I was going to ask if you're free for dinner on Wednesday. At my place. The offer of a plan, a simple, concrete, domestic plan, was the most romantic thing I had ever heard. It was a promise, a conscious choice. It was him telling me, in no uncertain terms, that the cabin wasn't a bubble. It was a beginning. Yes, I said, the word coming out on a rush of air. Yes, I'm free. A slow, brilliant smile spread across his face, lighting up his eyes. Good. He held my gaze for another moment before putting the truck back in drive and merging onto the highway. A few minutes later, as we drove in a now comfortable and contented silence, he reached over again. He didn't say anything. He just took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine, and rested our joined hands on the center console. It was a simple gesture of quiet possession, of connection made public in the anonymous space of his truck. I looked down at our hands, his strong and tanned against my paler, slighter ones. Then I looked at his profile as he drove, the steady line of his jaw, the faint crinkle of his eyes as he watched the road. The frantic, anxious noise that had been my constant companion for years was gone. In its place was a profound and peaceful quiet. I was no longer an observer, watching my life from a safe distance. I was in it. My hand was being held. I felt the warmth of his skin, the solid reality of his presence beside me, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was no longer scared. I felt like I had finally, after a lifetime of wandering, come home.